You are in another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. I'm your host, Derek Fosmeter, and tonight we are here once again with our lovable favorite Sony Artisan of Imagery. No shade to anyone else out there, but we love Tony, Tony Gale. So, Tony, we're going to be talking about video tonight. So, Tony, welcome. What do you got for us?
You know, some pictures, some slides, some talking, the usual.
The usual. And I'll have some questions for you, so we'll trade off.
Hi, everybody. I am Tony Gale. I'm a Sony Artisan of Imagery. And today I'm going to be going over beginning video for still photographers. Before I really get started, a couple of things. Trying to cover video in an hour is a little bit like trying to cover photography in an hour. So hopefully you learn enough from this that if there's more you want to know, you know what to look for. But we can't cover everything because we don't have 200 hours, which probably still wouldn't cover everything. I'll go over some of the things that I think are most important. You will find, just like in photography, that different people are going to have different opinions. So I'll tell you what I think and how I choose to do it. Some people are going to think differently. That's fine. Try it yourself, see what works, and we'll go from there. And if you do have questions, please do put them in the chat or in the question box, and Derek will be keeping an eye on that. All right, so as I mentioned, I am a Sony Artisan of Imagery. I'm also the APA National President, a Manfrotto Ambassador in X-Rite Colorado. I'm mentioning that in part just so if I mention other brands, you know, and nobody's like, you didn't say, you didn't tell us. I watch all those videos where everybody thinks everyone is making tons of money from every brand. That probably aren't. I'm a commercial photographer based in New York City. I've been here about 20 years. Mostly I shoot still pictures. Here's a bunch of them really fast because this is about video. And then we're going to go with why to shoot video. So why to shoot video, some of the gear that you might need, some of the camera settings and what they mean, and what might translate from stills to video, which is a lot because video is a bunch of still photos put together. That's all it is. Just like film, motion picture film, it's the same thing. It's a bunch of still photos put together to trick you into thinking it's moving. So it's not completely different than what you're used to. So to start with, why shoot video? One thing, behind the scenes, if you shoot commercially, it's a nice thing you can add for your clients, or you might have clients that ask for it. So you can say, this is what happened on the shoot. They can add it to their social media. Everybody's happy. Or if you don't shoot commercially, if you just shoot for yourself or for fun, which is great too, it might be fun to do a behind the scenes. Maybe you want to do a behind the scenes of this is what Thanksgiving dinner is like, so that the relatives who can't see it, who aren't there, can see what happened and all the cooking and everybody having fun. Maybe you want to do, this is what somebody's birthday was like. It could be anything. So as an example, this is not corrected or anything. I just threw this together this morning, but this is some quick behind the scenes footage from a shoot I did about a year ago. The client loves it. They always ask me to do it. The music was a little loud, so I skipped ahead. They always ask me to do it. It makes them happy. They don't always use it, as is always the case. But it also makes the shoot more interesting for the subjects. It feels like a bigger deal. Which brings us to, it adds value for clients, especially now with everything that's happening in the world and the craziness. Anything that you can do if you shoot professionally that adds value, that makes you stand out from other photographers, is good. It's potentially going to be harder out there. It's never easy to be in any creative field, of course. But anything you can do to separate yourself, especially the trend had been that a lot of clients look for photographers that shoot video. And if they have the choice between two, photographer A and photographer B, and one shoots video and one doesn't, they're a lot more likely to go with the one who does. even if it's not a very big piece of the actual project. So I would suggest, if you shoot professionally at all or have aspirations to at least know enough about video that when someone asks, you can say yes. That said, often you don't do both. So if it's a big video production and a big still production, you might hire a video team to come in and handle it. But if you speak the language and understand what's involved, you can control it, and it can make your clients happy. Make sure you charge more. Always charge more for more work, though, and more usage. And then, as we said, additional revenue sources. It creates the opportunity to upsell. It creates the opportunity to get a project that is mostly video with a little stills. I have found more and more still photographers are shooting video, but I've also heard of video production companies adding stills to their repertoire. So if you can be the person that adds video because you shoot stills, instead of losing that job to the company that shoots video and adds stills, that's good for you. And of course, if you don't shoot commercially or professionally, it's still just fun. Social media and self-promotion. So I suspect everybody watching has at least Facebook, probably, or Instagram. It's a way to have more interesting things besides pictures. So I, for example, have been doing a self-portrait every day for the last 2 months. And it gets really challenging to come up with new things. So I've done some with video. It keeps it interesting. This is slow motion. And then perhaps the most important thing with anything creative, because it's fun. If you're doing something creative like photography or video or writing or illustration or whatever, if the main impetus wasn't because you enjoy it, if you're not doing it because it's a fun thing to do to start with, it may not be the right thing as a career, because they're all hard. Anything creative is hard. It's worth it. Absolutely. I can't imagine doing anything else, but it's fun, and that makes the difficult nature of it worth it. So we'll go over a couple different types of video. We got time-lapse, cinemagraphs, and just video. So time-lapse is a video where you shoot a bunch of pictures in a row, normally with your camera, and you just put them together. It's a good way to get started. I think a lot of people who shoot video got started with time-lapses. All you need is a camera and an intervalometer. If you're shooting with something like the Sony a7R IV, it has a built-in time-lapse feature, so you don't need an external intervalometer. And one of the advantages that the Sony has, as opposed to some cameras that shoot with a time-lapse feature, is it will let you shoot raw images or JPEG, and it gives you the images and you assemble them later in post, which is what I would prefer. There are some options out there where it assembles it in camera, which I understand if you're in a hurry, but you lose so much control. If you shoot raw images and assemble them later, process them, color correct, all of that, you've got so much more control over the visual effect at the end, as opposed to being stuck with essentially a bunch of JPEGs, which, if everything worked perfect, could be fine, but it's rarely a perfect world. So this is Lower Manhattan a year or two ago. Just the camera on a tripod with an intervalometer. This was with the R2 before there was a time-lapse feature. It did have an app, but it wasn't the same. And then it's also something you can offer clients. So I did this for a company that does bike fitting. It does high-end bike fitting. It costs, maybe $400 or $500, but you can see how much goes into it. He's got this magic bike where he can move things remotely. It tests everything so that your bike fits exactly right. This is something that's difficult to show in still pictures, the real sense of it. And even with regular video, because there's so much involved, you would lose some of it. Like, it would be challenging to show the whole process as a video because it takes a couple hours and nobody wants to watch a video that long. So this was a great thing for him, and it was a fun thing to do, and it was super easy. I just had 2 cameras set up. One in the doorway mounted to the wall with a super clamp and a magic arm, and then one on a big tripod in the back. Then I added some sound, because video without sound is not always that interesting. We'll get to sound in a bit. I'm going a little fast because there's so much to cover. If you are going to do sound, this is a little bit of a time lapse. I've added music, but if you hear it, you can also hear all the ambient sounds. So the way I did that is I shot a time lapse, and then I added a video or a little audio recorder that I just hit on the set. So that audio recorder just recorded sounds through the entire shoot. Then I just picked random bits, so sounds of pots clanking, voices, and added them in later to try and keep it a little bit more interesting instead of just music. Not that music can't be great, but with all the other sounds, it adds a feeling of authenticity, and it adds a feeling of being there. And then there's cinemagraphs. So cinemagraphs are typically they're videos that are shot, and then you pick a piece to animate so the rest stays. It's also a very cool thing. There's a bunch of apps that do it. There's ways to do it in Photoshop. I'm not really going to get into the details of everything because there isn't time. You could probably do an hour session on just cinemagraphs or just time lapse. But cinemagraphs are a super fun thing, excuse me, that you can play with and start pretty easily, especially since all you need is Photoshop really to start. Photoshop will open video files if you didn't know that. And then you can add sound to cinemagraphs as well. This is with sound, and this is one that's silent. Sound is what makes video really go over the top. It's one of those things that is often overlooked at the beginning. I overlooked it when I started. I didn't give it enough importance, and I didn't pay enough attention to it, and it was a mistake. I have a lot of stuff from when I first started shooting video that the sound is terrible. And you can sort of fix bad sound, but only to a point. You can't make bad sound good. You might be able to make bad sound less bad. So we'll get to that. And then, of course, there's just standard video. So I shot this out in California in the Imperial Sand Dunes. I was helping a friend on a video project a few years ago. And this is just normal video, shooting HD, mostly on a tripod. But this is what we all think of when we think video. So all of that, quick overview on different kinds of video. And then what do you need to shoot video? You need a camera. Not a big surprise. Any camera will do. This is my RX100. Any camera that shoots video, you can shoot video. Any camera that shoots anything, you can shoot time lapse. It may or may not have a way to add an intervalometer, but you could just sit there, click, 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 and take pictures manually for 2 hours and then assemble that later and do a time lapse. It doesn't have to be something crazy to start with, but it can be. So that's what you need, a camera. What would be nice? A nice Sony mirrorless camera maybe, a lens, maybe a shoulder rig, a video tripod head, a gimbal, maybe a slider, external mic, headphones, external audio recorder, fast memory cards. Fast memory cards are important because if you're shooting, especially 4K, with a slow memory card, it might lose frames. It may not be able to keep up. A light meter, neutral density filters, a monitor, an external recorder. All of those are things that are nice to have. And as you shoot more, you will probably decide you need to have them. This is a shoulder rig. The reason to use a shoulder rig is to easily move around, but to keep the camera stable. Even cameras with really good in-body image stabilization, if you're just holding it at arm's length, you're going to see some shake. If you have it on your shoulder like this, it's a lot more steady and it's easy to move around. This is just the kit that I run around with, my run and gun kit. The most important thing, probably after the camera, is a tripod with a video head. A video head is different than a still head in that it moves the camera forward and back, so it tilts up and down, and it rotates left and right, but the camera doesn't move left and right. So you can't, well, without taking it off the head and redoing it, you can't shoot vertical video because for the most part, video is horizontal. That is changing with things like Instagram and social media, but video heads aren't designed in the same way that still head is. It's a different thing. And they tend to be very fluid. So you can see that lever there. It's got a knob so that you can make it smooth or tighter. And it allows you, if you're panning, to get a really nice smooth pan. Whereas if you're using your standard ball head or pan tilt head, it's not designed to have a nice, even, constant, smooth pan. So it can be a little jerky. And then another thing that is really good is an external monitor. If you're going to shoot stuff for YouTube or things like that where you're filming yourself, an external monitor is really important. Even if you have a camera like the new Sony camera they announced today, their new vlogging camera that has a screen that flips around so you can see it, it's still easier to look at a bigger monitor. And this I can place anywhere. So if I'm filming myself for something, I will sometimes, rather than putting it at the camera, I'll put it right in front of me, just attaching an HDMI cable, so I can make sure that the framing is right, look at the camera, look down if I need to. The Atomos Ninja 5 as well, and the stuff I'm showing you is stuff I use. There's plenty of options, but the Ninja 5 will also record video to SSDs. So it will record at a higher information codec, and we'll do all sorts of things that you need a really expensive camera to do, like false color and waveforms, which I'm not going to get into because this is beginning. But with this monitor, you can do that. You can't do that with your standard mirrorless camera or DSLR. It's also really useful in a little bit when you see some shots of the back of my camera of the menu system. This will let me record me going through my camera menu so I don't have to take a picture of the back of my camera. So I really like it. If you're going to get one, I would recommend, if you can, to get a recorder rather than just a monitor. Microphones, get external microphones. We'll talk about that in a bit. All right. So video settings, what do they mean? You've got your frame rate, 24p, 30p, 60p, 120p. P means progressive. Everybody still uses it. There's also interlaced, but really I don't see interlaced anywhere anymore. It used to be a common thing that you would have maybe 30p and 30i. Now everything just seems like it's P. There may be interlaced out there, but I don't see it. And what that means is 24p is 24 frames per second. That's what it's played back at. 30p, 60p, 120p. Actually, let me rephrase that. That's sort of what it means. What it actually means, more accurately, is it's how many frames per second are recorded. So I should maybe rephrase what I just said. There's somebody commenting right now about how I'm wrong, I promise you. 24p is recorded at 24 frames a second, and then you can choose to play it back at 24 frames a second. 30p is 30 frames a second, 60p, 60 frames a second, 120p, 120 frames a second. And then you can choose, when you output and render your video, tell it what frame rate to render at. So you might record at 120p and then render at 24p, which is what makes it slow motion. If you're recording at 120p and playing back at 24p, it's 5 times slower. That video with the pedals falling around me was shot at 240p, so it's 10 times slower. Wait, is that right? No, 6 times slower. 10 times slower. 30p is traditional video, 24p is traditional cinematic film. So if you went to the movies and they shot it on film, they were probably shooting at 24p. If you're watching a soap opera on TV, they were probably shooting at 30 and playing back at 30. 60p and 120p. There is some stuff now that's played back at 60p, and sometimes video games have crazy high frame rates. I think The Hobbit was shot at 50p and played back at 50p, and that's why it felt weird. So then the question is, what should you use? What should you play back at? Everybody's going to disagree. That's not true. Not everybody's going to disagree. Some people are going to disagree, and some people are going to say there's one right answer. The right answer, in my opinion, is 24p. You're not going to be wrong with 24p. There might be a reason to shoot something else as a playback, as just a standard video thing, but for the most part, 24p, you'll be fine. It looks nice and cinematic. If you want to shoot 30p, that's fine. If you're in Europe, it's 25. And actually, I don't know what the other one is. It's 25 and something else. And if you want to get pedantic, it's actually 23.997 and 29.997. 24p is a safe answer. If you get your camera and it says 24 or 30, 24 is fine. It's what I prefer. It's what most people I know prefer. But you don't need to worry about it that much. And then frame rate, what does it mean when frame rate is shot and then played back at 24p? These are some examples of different frame rates in capture, all played back at 24p. So this is 1 frame a second at 4, 15, 24, that's standard. 60 starts getting slow. 120, very slow. 240, very, very slow. I switched cameras between them. 480. And then 960. The reason the 960, the resolution looks lower is because it is. Because to capture at that kind of resolution, the camera has to use lower quality capture. For frame rates above 120, I was using the RX 100 because it will do high frame rates. It will do 240, 480, and 960 per second in 5-second bursts. But if you think about it, a 5-second burst at 480 is still 10, 20, no. It's a lot of seconds. It's a long time, longer than you need.
Tony,
So
we had
yes.
a question come in. If you would know of a practical reason why they would shoot The Hobbit at 50p, or if there's a reason why people would go up to that frame rate in general practice.
My understanding is that it's based on it feels more real, which to some people makes it feel artificial. But with 24, you can sense a little that it's video or film. At 50 or 60, because it's smoother, it feels more like life. So it's supposed to be more realistic. That's my understanding. All right. And then here's some real world reasons. So this is shot in slow motion on a gimbal. I think I was at 120. This is an example of something that's cool to shoot slow motion. You don't always want to. It's one of those things, sort of like crazy filters in Photoshop, that when you first start playing with it, you go crazy and you do way too much. Most of the time, you probably shouldn't shoot slow motion, but sometimes it's fun. And then this is quick. This is, I think, about 4 frames a second. So this is speeding it up, also on a gimbal, but you can see how useful the gimbal was because everything's pretty steady. Just 2 real world examples of those 2 things. So again, frame rate, 24p is a nice base. Most of the Sony cameras will do 30, 60, and 120. 60 and 120 will only be HD, not 4K. And I would encourage you to shoot in 4K. And I'll tell you why. So your options generally are 4K and 1080. Sometimes you have 720. 420 is standard definition. If you want to, this is on my R4, recorded with the Atomos. If you go into your camera, whatever camera you have, whether or not it's a Sony a7R4, a different Sony, a different brand, somewhere in there you've got a movie section. In there you've got your file format. I have mine set to XAVC-S 4K. I also have XAVC-S HD and AVC HD. I know that it all sounds like alphabet soup. XAVC-S is higher quality. AVC HD is lower quality in general, but also smaller. 4K is bigger than HD. AVC HD is also HD, but the file size should be smaller. And the image quality is probably not quite as good. And then in 4K, I have the options of 30p 100M, 30p 60M, 24p 100M, 24p 60M. 24p, that's what I prefer. 100M is how much information is being sent per second. And 100 is more than 60, so it's more information, so it's a higher quality video. If you're shooting 24p, you want whatever number that is to be the highest that your camera will do. It's a little tricky because it's not apples to apples, camera to camera, because they use different codecs. The codec is basically how it records the video. So the Sony is the XAVC-S. A different camera might have a different codec that may have a higher or lower number, but you can't really tell which of those file formats might be better. Obviously, it's a Sony, of course, but you can't really tell just from that number because different codecs have more and less efficiencies. And so sometimes there's other things that come into play. You might have a higher number, but a less efficient codec. So the quality is less, even though there's more information. You know, try it and see, do some research. Wait, I already did that one, sorry. And then if you want to get into HD, oh, that's why. If I'm on HD instead of 4K, here are my options. 60p at 50, 60p at 25, 30, 24, and 120. 60 and 120 I would really only use if I wanted slow motion, but sometimes you want that. And if you see, I should have actually added that. If you see someone do a speed ramp, which is where everything's normal and then goes into slow motion and then back to normal, they were shooting probably at 60 or 120, playing it back at 120 or 60 frames a second, then go into slow motion and then back. If you think you might want slow motion, shooting at a higher number is better. Sometimes sports is shot at a higher number so that they can go slow motion from the same camera. And then we have the slow and quick settings. That's really going to depend on your camera. The Sonys have it, which is if you go to slow and quick, you can tell it, I want to play back at 24, I want to play back at 30, or I want to play back at 60. And then you can pick a frame rate that it captures at. So 120, 60, 30, 15, 8, 4, and 1, I believe, maybe 2 and 1. So what that means is it's capturing at 120 frames a second and then playing back at 24 frames a second. This is all done in camera. So the camera knows that that 120 frame capture rate is to be output at 24, and it does that. Whereas if you shoot 120 normally, it will assume you want to play back at 120, and you'll have to tell your software, your editing software, to play it back at a different frame rate. It's not that hard to do, but when you want to do slow and quick and you want to see it in the field, it gives you that option. And then for things like 15, 8, 4, that's not available except in slow and quick because it's just not a normal thing to do. But slow and quick can be super fun. So this is why you want to shoot 4K. That little tiny square in the upper left is standard definition. That's what the TV you grew up with is. Although I guess maybe not anymore. Most of us grew up with.
A lot of us, yeah.
Some of you younger folks, maybe you never had standard definition. And then we had sort of pretend HD that was 1280 by 720. That's the next rectangle. And then we have HD, 1920 by 1080. It's quite a bit larger than SD. You can see that. Most of the time, if I shoot for a client, I deliver in HD. You know, for web, it's mostly fine. But most of our TVs now are 4K. 4K, oh, that number is wrong. It is not 8840 by 2160. It is, oh no, I can't think of it. 3840. It's 3840 by 2160. It's 4 times the size of HD. And what that allows you to do, aside from just having more information and higher quality and and greater sharpness, is if you record in 4K but output to HD, it allows you to crop tremendously. So I could shoot that 4K footage, decide I only want a quarter of that frame in my final video, and I can zoom in and it will have no loss of quality compared to standard HD. It allows you to fake camera movements. You can pan and tilt and zoom and do dolly zooms and all sorts of crazy things if you shoot in 4K and output in HD. So I would really encourage you to shoot in 4K if at all possible. And then just to give you a sense, because people are talking about 8K, 8K is again 4 times larger, and that's the big giant one. But you're not really seeing that on anything that any of us can afford, and the TVs are also crazy expensive. Although I bet B&H has one and will happily sell it to you. All right. So we talked about frame rate. We talked about 4K 1080. The file format, MP4, VCHD, XAVCHD, movie, etc. That's going to depend on your camera. All of it is sort of shorthand for complicated things that don't matter that much. You want the highest quality that your camera will do, but even if you record in most of those formats, it still shows up on your computer as an MP4. It's just how it was recorded and how it was encoded. So if you set your camera to XAVCHD or XAVCS 4K, and you record that, and then you download the file and it says MP4, and you think, oh my goodness, what happened? Something was wrong. Nothing was wrong. It's just how it is. It's still an MP4. It's just how it was encoded. All right. Then we have picture profiles. On the Sonys, they're called picture profiles. On other cameras, they could be called anything. I don't know, but I'm sure they have them. For video, what I would suggest you look at is normal, S-Log, and hybrid log gamut. So this is normal, no picture profile. Back when people were in Times Square. This is picture profile 1, which is movie gamma, which is essentially the same. Profile 2, which is still gamma. Picture profile 3, which is Rec 709. Picture profile 4, which is a different Rec 709. Cine 1. Cine 2. S-Log 2. S-Log 3. The other S-Log 3.
And Tony, as these are scrolling through, is this just differences in settings such as like the contrast and the way they render shadows and highlights, or is there anything deeper than that?
I'm about to go into it, but that's basically what it is.
Okay.
Basically, what they are is different ways that it captures and records stuff. So S-Log, as you could see, was super flat. Like it looked sort of gray. Hybrid log gamut, this is HLG2, also flat, not quite as flat. But the flat profiles are able to maintain more dynamic range. So most video is like shooting a JPEG. You shoot a JPEG, everything's baked in, you're stuck, right? You wish the color was different, you wish the exposure was different, You can mess with it a little, but you go too far and it breaks down. What things like HLG or S-Log do, because they're recorded flatter, they give you more latitude to mess with later. So the contrast is lower, the dynamic range is greater because the contrast is lower. And so you have more flexibility in your post-production process. That said, it takes more time, it takes more effort. You're probably gonna wanna get a LUT, which is a lookup table. There's a bunch of them out there. There's some you can buy, there's some that are free. You download that, you'd apply the LUT when you're editing. It's another step. If you're shooting professionally in an environment where there's a lot of range, S-Log could very well be the way to go. I will often shoot in S-Log. If you need to turn it around fast or you're just shooting for fun, and certainly starting out, you probably want to just start with normal. There's also S-Log2 and S-Log3. As you saw, I pretty much stick to S-Log2. I've done a ton of research and looked at a ton of videos to try and figure out which to use, and the consensus seems to be S-Log2. But you have S-Log3 if you want it. They behave a little differently.
So for most people who are just getting their feet wet in video, log is not going to be something that you're going to want to jump into. It's not a ready to upload. You're not going to shoot log and just upload it online. It has to be processed.
Well, I mean, it depends if you want it to look flat, I guess. Nothing has to be done. You could just make it look mushy and flat.
But it's made to,
good, yes.
It's made to be processed.
Yeah, it's sort of in between a JPEG and a RAW. It doesn't have all the information that a RAW does, but it has more information than a JPEG does. So as an example, this is S-Log2, shooting part with, super, super flat. I would not want to upload this. I mean, I wouldn't show it to anyone except as an example of this is what it looks like if you don't do anything. And then in a second, it will switch to a graded S-Log2. I think I could have made this clip a little shorter. And there it is graded. So that's the difference. There's a lot more information in the S-Log, and just throwing a LUT on there brings it in and makes it pop. The advantage too of a LUT, if you're shooting S-Log, is you've got a lot more flexibility with the final image. Like motion picture films, they do a lot of stuff with the color grading. They'll make it look, orange or blue or whatever. And if you do that with a standard video that you shot not in log, it's not going to hold up very well. If you really want to get creative with the look, log is the way to go. All right. Now we have shutter speed. In video, it's called shutter angle, but you have shutter speed. You want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate. So if you're shooting in 24p, you want to shoot it a 50th of a second. If you're shooting in 30, you want to be at a 60th. If you're shooting at 60, 120, 240, you want it to be double. And the reason for that is that's what looks the most natural to your eye. It allows for a little bit of blur, but not too much, and it doesn't look jerky. So as an example, 24 frames a second, 1/50th of a second, that feels natural. But now 24 frames a second, 1/50th, and then 1/25th of a second, you can see it feels a little bit more blurry. There's a little bit more motion in it, even though it's played back at 24. Now 100th, shot at 100, played back at 24, it's a little bit jerky, right? It feels a little unnatural. 200, it's really jerky. Hopefully this is doing well over Zoom. 400th, it feels like a bunch of pictures put together. 800, it's like a really fast time lapse. It feels unnatural. You can use that for effect. The beginning of Saving Private Ryan, they did that. They shot at a faster shutter angle so that it felt jerky and maybe more anxious. So that's why the frame rate is what it is and the capture rate is what it is. Because of that, you're limited in what you can change for exposure, right? If your shutter speed is locked, you can't change your shutter speed like you would for a still. So you can change your f-stop and your ISO. If you're shooting outside in bright sun and you're at ISO 100 at a 50th of a second, you're already at f22 and it might be a little hot. So that's where you might add a neutral density filter. And those are used a lot for video capture. Various NDs, graduated NDs, variable NDs. But if you want to shoot a lot of video, invest in a neutral density filter. Especially because if you're shooting something like log, the base ISO is higher. All right, so the next very important thing, white balance. Don't ever use auto white balance when you're shooting video. I would suggest doing a custom white balance. It's really easy with the Sony. You just go to white balance, go to custom, go to set, photograph a neutral source. I use an X-Rite color checker passport and get a nice neutral color. Failing that, you can do a specific setting, daylight, shadow, cloudy, incandescent, what have you. The reason to not do that is this is some nice footage I shot near my parents' house. Looks nice and warm. Everything looks good. Wait a minute. The color's starting to shift a little. Shifting a little bit more. Hopefully you can see that. In a second, you're really going to see it. And now it shifted completely. That happened because I didn't think to put on auto white. I didn't think to put it on a specific white balance. It was on auto white. And auto white will change as what's in your frame changes. And you'll see that shift. So if you're going from inside to outside, or you're going from shadow to sunny, or anything like that, that color will change. And unless there's a really compelling reason to let the camera do it on its own, it's better to lock it in. If you're going from inside and all the light's really warm and then you need to go outside, you might have no choice. But it's really difficult to fix that shift because it's jumping around. And it's not as simple as, well, I just need to make this warmer, but where? You know, where's that transition? Do I have to look at 12 frames and correct them a little bit different each time to get it where I want it? Go to a custom white balance. Way, way, way better. I learned a valuable lesson doing this that I knew, like so many things, I knew I shouldn't have done it and I did it anyway. Do you want to ban auto ISO versus a specific ISO? In general, with video, I think you want to lock everything down. However, that example of maybe you're following your mom from inside the kitchen, down the stairs, outside, into the sun, and then into the car, that exposure is going to jump all around. If the camera's on auto ISO and everything else is locked, hopefully the exposure will shift as it needs to. The ISO will go up and down so you can make that shot in one long continuous shot. Because again, you don't have the flexibility that you do with stills to correct exposure. So that's a reason to use auto ISO versus specific ISO. Same thing with exposure. 95% of the time, you want to be on manual. Shutter is locked at a 50th. Your f-stop is whatever. Your ISO is whatever. Maybe you're using a neutral density filter. But what you don't want is it to change. If you are shooting video of somebody talking and they're center frame and then they move a little so that they're not center frame anymore, your exposure might change because of the way the metering is set up, and your white balance might change because of the way the auto white is working. And you don't want that to happen. Just because they're not center doesn't mean the exposure should be different. If you're shooting stills on aperture priority, it's fine. You just fix it. But again, with video, it's a challenging fix. Manual focus versus autofocus. There are old school people that swear up and down that manual focus is the answer. If you are on a really big production and you've got your gaffers, your grips, your assistant camera, your assistant directors, you have a focus puller whose job it is to be different than the camera operator and is actually adjusting the focus. Most of us don't have that luxury or that gear. So for most things, if you have a good camera, autofocus is probably fine, but you should test it. With the R4, the R3, the R2, because they have face detect, if I'm shooting one person, I always will use autofocus because it will find the face and just track on that. So if they move or if the camera moves, it tracks that focus. The R4 added eye autofocus in video, so it will focus on the eye, even if the person moves. It lets you shoot a lot more shallow. That said, if you start paying attention in movies or television, you'll see there's a lot of shots that are out of focus. I see it all the time, especially if I'm in a theater when we used to go to theaters, where it must have been the best take for whatever reason, but the focus was off. And you can see that somebody's just a little bit soft and something else is sharp. Video is a little more forgiving of that than stills are, but even so, you want it as sharp as possible. All right, sound. I promised I'd get to sound. Sound is super important. Bad sound will ruin your video more than anything else. If the exposure's off a little or the color's off a little, but the sound is great, you still have a video that could work. If everything is perfect and the sound is bad, that's all anybody's going to notice is how bad the sound is. And I'm sure we've all seen, especially online videos, where the sound is just awful. So your choices are in camera. Your camera has a mic. It's always there. Generally, the quality is not great. Not necessarily because the mic itself is a poor mic, but because it's not close enough to your subject. When you see vloggers using the built-in mic and it works, it's usually like the new vlogging camera Sony announced today. It's usually because the camera is so close. Part of what makes sound good is the proximity of the microphone to whatever the subject is. So in camera, it's always there. It's typically poor quality. You can do a shotgun mic. It's directional. It's better quality. It's still limited by camera placement, but it focuses the sound pattern a little bit better if it's mounted on the camera. It's definitely a trade up from the on-camera sound. So I have this, for example, the Sony XLR-K2M, which is a kit that has a shotgun mic that mounts in the MIS shoe. So it gives you better quality sound. It's more directional. One advantage of this kit in particular, it only works with Sony, is it also has 2 XLR ports, which is a higher quality audio format. And it has audio adjustments in the unit. And it will do uncompressed audio. I know that's a lot. But all of your cameras with a mini phone jack, the little headphone jack, all of them are recording compressed audio. If you use something like this, it does uncompressed audio. So the audio quality is a little better. If it's just people talking, you'll probably never hear the difference. But if you're recording music or something like that, it's really worth considering. Then there's a wired lav mic, which is a lav mic is the lavalier mic. It goes on your lapel. It's really close to the subject. It can be visible. You can get things to hide it under clothes, but it's good. And then a wireless lav mic has the advantage over a wired lav mic in that there's a body pack. When I speak at the event space, we use a wireless lav mic. There's a body pack and there's a receiver that's hooked up to whatever, either your camera or a recorder. So your subject can move around. The challenge with that is sometimes you can get interference. If there's just stuff in the air, sometimes at the Javits at a big trade show, wireless lav mics sometimes break down a little because there's just so much going on. But they're really useful. So I use the Sony, the UWP D21. I have a couple of those. There's a range of those, of different lav mics. One thing with sound, I would really stress more than a lot of things in video or stills is that most of the time the cheap stuff is a mistake. Sometimes in what we do, cheap stuff is good. With audio, with sound, it almost never is. And I've made the mistake of, I bought the $30 mic and then it wasn't good enough, but I didn't want to buy the $400 mic So then I bought the $100 mic, but it also wasn't good enough. And I ended up spending a lot more money buying things that I just collect dust because the audio quality isn't there, instead of buying the better one to begin with. So do your research, make sure you look at the reviews. I've got some suggestions of people to follow on YouTube who do a lot of stuff with audio at the end, but really pay attention. It's one of those things that going cheap it's going to hurt. You'll get distortion, you'll get noise, you'll get a hiss. It's not good. And then also you can get an external recorder, either with a built-in mic or that you plug a mic into. I do use external recorders often as my main audio. I'll run the mic directly into the recorder, and then I will have usually 2 cameras running, and then the other camera I'll put a shotgun mic on as a backup. If it's a big production, I'll actually have 3 audio sources. I'll have a lav mic, I'll have a boom mic, and I'll have a shotgun mic, just as a backup to the backup to the backup. So this, hopefully you can hear it. This is ungraded log footage. This is with a lav mic.
No audio coming through.
Oh, no? Well,
No.
That's too bad.
We can imagine.
It's really clear. It sounds great. And now you can hear the cars going by, and you can hear the wind. And so, well, that's too bad. So it's a huge difference having that was a lav and on camera. It really makes a big difference. And if you pay attention to what you're watching online, you'll see a difference, or hear a difference rather. It is really, really important to have that good audio. Other video features, we got zebras. So what zebras are is something that you can set to either do a mid-tone or where highlights are, and you can tell it in video, this is what is out of gamut. This is what's overexposed, so you can control your exposure more easily. If you know that those lights are super important and you need to have them, you can set your zebras and adjust that. It will tell you, you just change your exposure until the zebras go away. What setting you should use depends on if you're using S-Log or standard or hybrid log gamut, so that all varies. Don't steal music. Don't just use music you have. Make sure that you're allowed to use the music. These are some examples. I use one of these and don't really know about the others. But the Free Music Archive is a source where you can get royalty-free music for free for different uses. You have to be careful and follow the rules. And to be honest, you're going to get better music if you subscribe to something or pay for it. But it's a way to get started. But you have to make sure. It will say you can use this music for commercial use, or you can't use it for commercial use. You can use it for commercial use, but you have to give attribution, which means there has to be credit. You have to make sure you follow the rules, or there's things like Epidemic or Pond5 or Artlist that you can pay either a subscription or per song to download stuff. You do want to make sure wherever you get it that it covers what you need. For example, sometimes you can license music for YouTube, but if for some reason it's going to show up on television, that license doesn't do that and you have to pay more for that. All of that's fine as long as you know what the rule is and you follow those rules. But don't just take music. It doesn't matter that you're not making money off of it. It's the same as if someone took your picture and just put it on their website and said, I'm not making any money. We're all creatives. If someone's using our work, we all deserve to get paid. So really, I would encourage you, if you get into it, look at subscribing to something or licensing something. Composition, the typical aspect ratio for a 35mm based camera is 3:2, kind of square. Most video that we record is 16:9. And then current cinema standard is 2.35:1, which is even wider. So what that means is if you're looking at your screen, the top and bottom are going to get cropped out when you shoot video. If you have your camera set to the video setting, it should do it automatically with black bars. But be aware of that if you're composing, if you're setting up, and you're not in the video mode. So on my cameras, if I'm on just standard manual, I can hit the record button. It will record in any setting I'm in. But if I'm in, say, aperture priority and hit record, all of a sudden the frame lost the top and bottom. So be aware of that. These are just some examples. It's 3:2 on the upper left, 16:9 standard video on the upper right, 4:3, which is the old TV standard on the lower right, and then 2:3:5:1. So you get a sense of how much different it feels. And you can see, I think, that the more horizontal ones feel more like cinema. They feel more like a movie. All right, some quick things that are similar with stills video. Composition. If your composition is good, it's good. Like we said before, a still photo and a video, it's the same thing, only a whole bunch of them in a row. If you are good with composition, it's the same. Exposure, same thing. Good exposure is good exposure. Framing, good framing. Lighting, if you have good light, it's good light, whether it's video or stills. You obviously can't use a flash with video because you need something that's constant. But all of those elements that you have learned as a still photographer carry over. And then, real quick, how do you get started? So this is an example of something I did in 2016. Every day for a year, I shot at least 5 seconds of video. And then I cut them together by month. So this is February. And every day I'd shoot video. It got really hard. There's Brian Smith. It got really, really hard to come up with new things to shoot. But it was worth it just as an exercise to get out and shoot footage, to just shoot something. Because it's harder to shoot video without an end goal in mind, at least for me, than it is for stills. You know, if I'm walking down the street and something looks cool and I take a picture, I've got a cool picture. If I'm walking down the street and something looks cool and I shoot video footage, then what? Like, nobody just says, hey, look at this 4-second clip I shot. So this isn't a way to just get yourself in that mindset and try things. 5 seconds a day for a year. There were days I really didn't want to do it. You can see there was a lot of subway stuff because I'd be on the subway and that's on my way home and be like, I haven't shot anything. But it's a good exercise to just get started. And then quickly, software for video editing. Some of the things that are out there, and this is by no means comprehensive. If you're on a Mac, you already have iMovie, it's free. If you're on a PC, you already have Windows Movie Maker, also free. If you want to upgrade, you've got DaVinci Resolve. It has both a free and a paid version and is very, very good. Adobe Premiere, if you have the Adobe suite, you already have that. Final Cut X, Mac only. If you just want to spend a huge amount of money and get into something really complicated, but that a lot of professional film editors use, there's Avid. I use Premiere and Resolve myself. And then if you want to learn more about video, alphauniverse.com has stuff. Sony has a cinema devoted site, Sony Cine. No Film School has a lot of great information. Artlist and Premium Beat have good blogs. YouTube, Sony Alpha Universe. Curtis Judd does a lot of really good stuff with audio and mics. Alex Knickerbocker also does a lot of really good stuff with audio and mics. Gerald Undone does just a lot of general video stuff, audio, lighting, a lot of technical stuff. He has, I think, an hour video just on the Atomos Ninja 5. Indie Mogul is a great site, and Patrick H. Willems has a lot of really cool stuff. So if you are interested in more video, I look at all of those. And then here's me and Sony. All right, are there any questions?
We do have a couple. So going back to zebras, can you use the zebras for exposure on a gray card?
Yes. So it depends on your camera, but you can set the zebra level to whatever. So I can set it from 70, 80, 90, 95, 100 plus a custom. You should be able to set a custom zebra to whatever level you want the gray card to be. So let's say you want the gray card to be at 40. If you can set your zebras to 40, you can do that. If you can't set the zebras that low, you could set them to some amount that you know the answer to. So let's say you set them to 70. Expose your gray card so you get the zebras at 70, but you know that you want to be 2 stops brighter than that, and then just adjust. Does that make sense?
That does. Now, as far as people who want to process video and maybe don't have the funds to invest in, Premiere or Final Cut, is there a good that you recommend? I mean, iMovie, is iMovie a good start? DaVinci?
Yeah, DaVinci Resolve.
Okay.
There are a lot of people doing really great stuff with the free version. The free version does everything that most of us would ever need. Frankly, I'm not sure why it's free. It's that good.
All right. If you're listening out there, start charging. Tony Gale says you should.
Don't charge me though.
Is there a recommendation that you make as far as lenses when going into videos, zoom versus prime?
So we didn't really get into the difference between like cine lenses and still lenses because this is only an hour. I started with more primes because it just felt like I had more control. And I pretty much never zoom while filming. So I would suggest as a start, if you can, depends on how many lenses you have and how much money you have. But I would start with primes, get used to it, and then if you feel like you need zooms, go from there.
That sounds like good advice. Now, Charles wants to know if you're doing 24p and you want 1/50th of a second, do you adjust exposure with the aperture and or ISO?
So what I will do to start with, since the shutter speed's locked down, I will think about what aperture I want. So if I'm inside photographing an interview, I probably want f5.6 because I don't want the background to be too sharp, but I also don't want like their eyes to be sharp, but their ears soft. And then if I'm outside, I'll think about that too. Most of the time, you don't want to be at like f22 in video because you don't want everything sharp. You want the focus to be on your subject, and you don't want everything, if you're doing some beautiful, here's the desert, everything can be sharp. If you're doing video of Derek walking through Times Square, it can get distracting if everything is sharp. So I would pick my f-stop. Once my shutter speed's locked, I've picked my f-stop. Then if I can make those work with an ISO, I will. If not, so let's say we are shooting in full sun for some reason, even though it looks terrible in terms of light. Even at ISO 100, I'm still going to be at f22, and then I would add a neutral density filter to bring it down.
We had a follow-up on the gray card question. So how can you tell when the gray card is at the correct value?
With the zebras, so what you would do is you'd put it in there, you'd change your exposure until you see the zebras. The zebras are set to that level, and then you back it off until the zebras go away.
Perfect. And we actually
experiment for yourself because every camera is going to be different with zebras. So.
Okay, and we had a couple people who wanted to know if they can get these slides. Is this available anywhere?
Well, aren't you recording it?
We are recording it. So for those for those of you, it'll be easy to go in, take screen grabs, of anything pertinent. Tony, it's not uploaded on a site or anything, but we will have it archived on Facebook and our live stream channel. So livestream.com/BH event space and Facebook.com/BH event space /videos. And that'll bring you to our video section.
And if you have specific questions, you're welcome to reach out to me. If I don't get back to you, just reach out to me again in a couple of weeks because I got distracted.
And we do have a question as far as what prime you would recommend for vlogging. So we had one asking for vlogging, one asking for interviews. So if there's a good
So,
range, do you recommend 50, 35?
so I'm going to assume that we're on full frame because we have to make some assumptions. For vlogging on full frame, I would probably look at a 35 or a 28 because the camera is so close to you, you don't want anything tighter than that. For interviews, if you're just going to have one, I would look at a 50 or an 85.
Now, I will say, and I'm going to take a step further than Tony on that. I know he mentioned it a couple times, but I will drive it home. Sony did just release a ZV-1, which is a compact, ready to go vlogging camera. It really is, from all the first looks at it I've seen, is a great camera. We actually are going to be going live with Jason Vong tomorrow to talk about it. So we are getting the event currently listed up on our website. We'll have that up tonight. But I'm telling you now, tomorrow, 5:30 Eastern time, we are going to be with Jason Vong, who is a Sony Alpha guy. He is also a hybrid shooter. So he's somebody who does stills and video. And he's going to be talking about his experience with the new Sony camera. That is, for those of you asking about vlogging, this camera is a camera that is good for people who don't want to get bogged down with settings. So it's a great camera that gets you jump started into video and vlogging and all that. So for those of you who are going to be around and really interested in getting into video, tomorrow, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. Again, for those of you who wanted to know where our live stream and Facebook archive videos are, livestream.com/BH event space, and on Facebook, facebook.com/BH event space, or if you just Google B&H event space, it'll pull up all the links as well. So on behalf of B&H, I would like to thank you, Tony. I'd like to thank our sponsor for this, Sony. As always, we love having our Sony artisans in here to enlighten us with their experience and wise wisdom. So Tony, thank you. Thank you, Sony. We'll look forward to having you back soon. Everybody else, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next time on another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space.